Hello, brothers and sisters. Thanks for joining me. Today is going to be a little bit different. A TikTok friend posted a couple of videos here that were related to paladins in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And since I love Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I felt like I had to cover it. He mentioned he wasn't up on the history of paladins in early D&D, and I thought I would do a deep dive into it. Now that I'm retired, I got nothing better to do, and I started playing D&D in I think 79 with campaigns that were mostly set in Greyhawk, either basic D&D or some of them were advanced D&D. I ended up playing mostly advanced. So my experience is mostly with advanced and basic rule sets. So I've got some biases there. They're my favorites. They are a little more brutal, I hear, than the newer ones, but I still like it. So I love me some advanced D&D. In fact, my buddy who always watches me making my videos is Freet from the original Advanced D&D Player's Handbook. Everyone who's played AD&D recognizes this bad boy. So let's get to it. Let's watch a couple of little clips from these videos just to get us started.
The majority of the party is good aligned. Do you think it's okay?
Do you think it's okay to have an evil character in the party? Simple answer, absolutely yes, 1,000,000,000% have an evil character in your good party.
I completely agree with you. And he's got a few caveats, which are good caveats. And I'll link his TikToks in here so you guys can go watch the full things. But that started me thinking about the whole subject. And I sent him a comment that said, hey, the only problem is if there's a paladin. Parties with paladins are impossible to keep together. It's hard to always be good in D&D. My favorite is to be chaotic neutrals because basically if you're chaotic neutral, you can do anything you like. But for full disclosure, I tend to like to play my characters as chaotic good most of the time. I kind of feel like a Han Solo is kind of the way to go for a play style, but occasionally I like the freedom to be able to do something a little bit more wild, and chaotic neutral allows me to do that. Let's see what else he has to say about this.
I feel like paladins really get a bum rap, and it's not without reason, right? I totally get why paladins have this reputation. The classic paladin in AD&D was the consummate do-gooder, wouldn't budge on any of his moral convictions. Players tended to play them as people who would just unthinkably charge into the den of evil or take whatever opportunity they could get to smite evil. So yeah, that kind of inflexibility can make it really hard to have a cohesive party.
Fully agree. Fully agree.
And I don't know this because I'm not an expert on the history of the game, but it seems like that's exactly why paladins have gone through the evolution they have, where they, instead of like vowing to a god, they vow to a variety of different oaths, because that gives them like some more flexibility, some different flavors. Makes it easier, I think, to create a paladin that can cohere with a party of varied alignments.
I fully agree. 100% we're on the same page. So since he says he's not familiar with the history of D&D, let's talk a little bit about the history of D&D and the evolution of paladins. I completely agree with them. It is actually fascinating how we got from original paladins to the way they are today, and they're nothing like they used to be. I don't think. So D&D first started in 1974, as you can see here, and it really started as something called chainmail. If I remember my history, back in 72, 73, the great Gary Gygax, who invented Dungeons and Dragons, he was really interested in miniatures, and he wanted to make miniature combat in a fantasy setting. So I think he stole pretty much everything in D&D from the Lord of the Rings, to be fair. His elves are just like Lord of the Rings elves. Halflings are just like Lord of the Rings halflings. Orcs are just like them. I always saw the Uruk-hai as half-orcs myself. So there's a lot lifted there. He started out with a booklet called Chainmail, and that's where it all started. And then a little while later, he ran into this guy called Dave Arneson, and the two of them collaborated and really came up with what we think of as D&D today. What if we took those miniatures and started playing their roles and went out and fought the dragons and saved the fair maiden and destroyed the ring in Mount Doom? And that was 1974. At that time, they released original D&D, right? And so original D&D is where it all started in 74. And I just happened to have copies of most of the early D&D materials because I used to buy everything related to D&D in my younger days. So Paladin makes its first appearance in this book here, which is Men in Magic. And so, as you can see here from page 8, Paladins have been in D&D since D&D was a thing. If you had a charisma score of 17 or greater, fighters could become paladins if they are lawful. So there were very few paladins in original D&D or in advanced D&D because the stats you needed to become a paladin were super hard. Rolling a 17 with 3d6 is not easy. And there's different ways of rolling, but it was never easy to get 17s or better under any of the different systems. And they had to be lawful. And that was another interesting thing about original D&D, because original D&D and then the basic D&D that came after didn't have the concepts of good or evil. It was a battle between law and chaos or neutrality. So I think Gygax borrowed that from the Malnabani and the Elric novels, which are also fabulous. I always gravitate towards the anti-heroes. I love Elric. I love Moonglum. I love all the Moorcock stuff. I love Thomas Covenant. I love Darth Vader. It's one of my problems that I like the bad guys. We could argue about Thomas Covenant and Elric being bad guys all day long. I definitely think Darth Vader is a bad guy, but Star Wars is the redemption arc of Anakin Skywalker in the first 6 episodes. But I digress. Oh, and R2-D2 is the hero of Star Wars. But again, I digress. So you had to be lawful and you had to have a 17 charisma. Super hard. Look at what else it says. If such fighters elect, they can become paladins, always doing lawful deeds. For any chaotic act will immediately revoke the status of the paladin. So not evil, but chaotic, because there was no evil. And it can never be regained. So once you lost your paladin status, it was impossible to get it back, and you just became a fighter. Now, on top of that, if you look at the bottom of the page, the last paragraph, paladins were never allowed to possess more than 4 magical items, excluding armor, shield, and 4 weapons that they normally use. They will give away all treasure that they win, save that which is necessary to maintain themselves, their men, their modest castle. Gifts must be to the poor and charitable or religious institutions. Save what is necessary to maintain themselves and their man and a modest castle, gifts must be to the poor or to the charitable or religious institutions, i.e., not to some other character played in the game. Paladin's stronghold cannot be above 200,000 gold pieces in total cost, and no more than 200 men can be retained to guard it. Paladins normally prefer to dwell with lawful princes or patriarchs, but circumstances may prevent this. They will associate only with lawful characters. So paladins had big strictures put on them right at the beginning. I think this is because of player balance. Paladins started out with so many abilities of detect evil and they could cast some spells and all these kind of things that in order to balance it out, they had to have some downsides. So these were the downsides. And so the original D&D paladin was so constrained in wealth and in actions based on his alignment that for all intents and purposes, you had to be lawful. Then at about the same time, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons came out and the Dungeons and Dragons basic set. To me, the main difference between the two is the diametrically opposed alignment matrix in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is much more complicated. So that's where it introduced good versus evil versus chaotic versus lawful and could match those alignments up on a matrix. So that's where you could see lawful good. But basic Dungeons and Dragons stayed going along the old path of just law, chaos, and neutral. And I believe this all happened because Dave Annison and Gygax had some sort of falling out, and Annison left TSR. But he was one of the creators of D&D. So I think Gygax created Advanced D&D and tried to say, hey, Annison has nothing to do with it. It's completely different, in order to cut him out of any potential royalties, is what happened. And I think Annison eventually sued him and won, and got a comfortable income off of D&D sales and the agreement that he would always be a creator of D&D. And the courts agreed with him that Advanced D&D and all future generations of D&D were based on his original work. And to be fair, I think he did a lot of the original work on D&D. So now there's two different branches of D&D starting in 1977. So let's start with the basic set. The basic set does not talk about paladins until this book. So this book was released in 1983, I believe, 83 or 84. And this is really the third edition of where it says BCMI. So the original basic set, which some people call the home set, and then the next set, the Moldavi set, I've looked in them because I have them, and they don't even mention paladins. But this one does. And this is the third one. In the BCMI, there's a basic, there's an expert, and then there's a companion. And so the companion book does mention it. So let's see what the companion book says about it. On page 17 of the companion book, the traveling section, they say, the alignment of a wandering fighter determines his or her title, special abilities, and so forth. If they're lawful, they can be a paladin. And what we see here is some of the same strictures as the others, but they introduce the whole idea of oaths in basic D&D. So if they're lawful, the fighter's got to swear fealty, an oath of service, to a lawful church to gain paladin status. The fighter must be name level or greater to be accepted by the church. Thereafter, the paladin may be summoned by the church's leaders, the theocracy, at any time, and must do as they command, as long as the service aids the powers of good. And then they left in the other strictures of the paladin may only travel with a number of hirelings equal to their level, and they must assist anyone who asks for help, with two exceptions. Evil need not be aided, and if a paladin is on a mission for a higher authority, such as a quest, only a small amount of help need be given, along with an explanation. Assistance never involves donations of money or items, but only service for a short time. And then it was good because they put in neutral paladins who had a few extra abilities, but not magic, and weren't tied to a church. And they put chaotic sort of paladins in. They called them Avengers. The neutral ones are knights. And the Avengers, it's basically what you would think of as kind of a Dark Knight kind of character. They can do evil spells and command undead like an evil cleric. So very interesting. The other thing it doesn't mention here is it says nothing about losing paladin status for acts. So that would have been really up to DM discretion. In parallel to this, we've got Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. As you can see, this is a well-used book. This one has seen the most action of my books, and this might actually be a second copy. This may not be my original. I can't remember. I think I did wear one out so much that I had to get another one. And I actually do own another one that's in better shape for when I wear this one out before they disappear. So let's look at what they said about paladins in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And so in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, remember, we've added in good and evil, so they've got to be lawful good here. Paladin character is a fighter subclass, but unlike normal fighters, all paladins must begin as lawful good and always remain lawful good or absolutely lose all their special powers which are given to them. They have both fighting abilities and limited spell powers at high level. Again, they've got to have really high stats, so becoming a paladin is super, super hard. Then if we jump over to the other side at the bottom, again, they may never retain more than 10 magic items. And then if we flip the page, I do love the artwork from the original AD&D. They have to give a 10% tithe of all income, be it treasure, wages, or whatever. So it's got to be going to a lawful good charity or church. They will have henchmen of lawful good alignment and none other. They will associate only with characters and creatures of good alignment. Paladins can join a company of adventurers which contains non-evil neutrals only on a single expedition, and only if some which will further the cause of lawful good purpose. It is possible for paladins will take service on or form an alliance with lawful good characters, whether players or not, who are clerics or fighters of noble status. They do not attract a body of men at arms, no service as do regular fighters. Yeah, regular fighters actually get henchmen for free in the old AD&D. It was one of the perks. So as you can see here, they can't even really associate with chaotic good folks, and only temporarily can they join a neutral good party. What that really means in practice is all paladins have to be in only lawful good parties. And if anyone in the party strays, they have to get kicked out of the party, or if the paladin strays, he loses the ability to have his paladin powers, and it's irrevocable. So it was tough doing the way of the paladin. And I think, again, Gygax did this for player balance, because I think paladins are the strongest character class at early to mid levels, maybe even at high levels. Being a fighter with magical abilities is pretty stout. And being a fighter, being able to use pretty much any weapon and having some spells, and you can use any armor, that's a pretty stout character. Fighters are actually strong in advanced D&D. And I think Gygax did have a bent towards good. I don't think he liked evil characters, because if you look, there aren't any evil-only characters in advanced D&D except the assassin class. No one else. Everyone else has got to be good or neutral. Rangers are sort of a druid fighter-ish, but they all have to be good. Well, druids are neutral. Why can't you have an evil ranger? And I have played homebrews with people who did do that. So Gygax definitely had a human-centric and he had a good-centric. And I say human-centric because paladins had to be human in early AD&D. And quickly, if you played AD&D, you learned being multi-class was a fool's errand, because very quickly the rest of the party outstripped your levels, and you'd have like a 7th level fighter, and all your multi-class guys were 3rd level. And the 7th level fighter was way stronger than the multi-classes in the games that I remember playing. So then we move on to the 2nd edition. And so the 2nd edition was still written by TSR, so controlled by Gygax, but they had a shift. I wasn't as big a fan of 2nd edition because it retained most of the rules of AD&D, but it started the road to sanitizing D&D. I think that's because the satanic panic happened in the 80s. They removed some of the more questionable aspects. Like I think they took devils and they started softening or taking out devils and demons and things like that. And I think it was a mistake, but they did it. And I did play it. So I've got the player's handbook. It's not as battered and worn as the 1st edition, but I did play with this book. But this is really where my playing ended. I don't believe I've played in a D&D edition past 2nd. But the rules are almost the same. So let's take a look at them. So on page 27, lawfulness and good deeds are the meat and drink of a paladin. If a paladin ever knowingly performs a chaotic act, he must seek a high level, 7th level or more cleric of lawful good alignment, confess his sin, and do penance as prescribed by the cleric. So in this edition, they actually made it possible to get repentance. I guess kind of like going to a Catholic priest and getting your sins forgiven. So it wasn't irrevocable anymore, but that was for chaotic. If a paladin should knowingly and willingly perform an evil act, he loses the status of paladinhood immediately and irrevocably. All benefits are then lost. No deed or magic can restore the character to paladinhood. He is ever after a fighter. The character's level remains unchanged when this occurs, and experience points are adjusted accordingly. Thereafter, the character is bound by the rules of fighters. He does not gain the benefits of weapon specialization if this is used, since he did not select this for his character at the start. If the paladin commits an evil act while enchanted or controlled by magic, he loses the paladin status until he can atone for the deed. This loss of status means the character loses all his special abilities and essentially functions as a fighter without weapon specialization of the same level. Regaining his status undoubtedly requires completion of some dangerous quest or important mission to once again prove his worth and assuage his own guilt. He gains no experience prior to or during the course of this mission and regains the standing of a paladin only upon completing the quest. Then we have the same strictures around owning wealth. Paladin may not possess more than 10 magic items. He can never retain wealth. He's got a tithe, does not attract a body of followers, and he may only employ lawful good henchmen. He will cooperate with characters of other alignments only as long as they behave themselves. He will try to show them the proper way to live through both word and deed. The paladin realizes that most people simply cannot maintain his high standards. Even thieves can be tolerated, provided they are not evil and are sincerely trying to reform. He will not abide the company of those who commit evil or unrighteous acts. Stealth in the cause of good is acceptable, though only as a last resort. So they've made paladins easier to play by second edition here. It's still difficult, but it can be done as long as the rest of the party behaves itself. If the rest of the party decides to be evil and chaotic, it's going to be trouble for the paladin. And again, I was never a fan of this edition too much because they did water down D&D too much. The rules were pretty much the same. It was just as brutal as AD&D. Most of my characters never made it to 10th level. They usually got killed long before that. Though my favorite character was an AD&D bard that managed to make it to bard, and that was a journey. But paladins were always too difficult to play. I've said that I've never played another edition, but I almost started into a campaign that somebody was playing as an old 5e campaign from about, what was that, 2014? So I do actually have a first printing D&D Player's Handbook from 5th edition from 2014, but I never actually played it. So that's why this one is still so shiny. It's pretty much mint. Where all the rest of them have been played with. But let's see, what does the 5th edition say? So a paladin tries to hold to the highest standards of conduct. He tries to hold to the highest standards, but even the most virtuous paladin is fallible. Sometimes the right path proves too demanding. Sometimes a situation calls for the lesser of two evils. And sometimes the heat of emotion causes a paladin to transgress his or her oath. And this is under breaking of oaths. And this is really all it says about losing your paladin status or playing lawful good or something. And this is really where the original post is talking about. So I think the original poster is either a 5e player for the most part, or perhaps a basic player, because that's where the oaths are all found. Or it's homebrew and somebody added them in. A paladin who has broken a vow typically seeks absolution from a cleric who shares his or her faith, or from another paladin of the same order. The paladin might spend an all-night vigil in prayer as a sign of penitence, or undertake a fast or similar act of self-denial. After a rite of confession and forgiveness, the paladin starts fresh. So yeah, just like a Catholic act of contrition and repentance so that the priest will forgive your sins. And, Catholics believe all sins can be forgiven if you are truly repentant. So this falls in line with that. If a paladin willfully violates his oath and shows no sign of repentance, the consequences can be more serious. At the DM's discretion, an impenitent paladin might be forced to abandon this class and adopt another, or perhaps to take the Oathbreaker Paladin option that appears in the Dungeon Master's Guide. I do have a copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide, but I didn't feel like it was necessary to pull it out for this. So that is the history of the Paladin. It's very interesting. Paladin started with original D&D. It was in there, but they didn't have good and evil, so you had to swear to a lawful church. And then they completely left it out of the basic set until you got to the companion edition. When you were high enough level to use the companion edition and reach name level, a fighter could switch over to a paladin. It gained the abilities of a paladin. But it was also very interesting because they did introduce the oaths, and you could have an oath to a church or to some lord or something like that. And depending if you were lawful, you could be a paladin. If you were neutral, you could be a knight. And if you were chaotic, you could be an avenger, which is basically what you would think of as an evil paladin, or maybe a dark knight if you're playing some other game. I don't even know if they have dark knights in 5e. I haven't looked to see, but I've seen them in some other games. The companion edition took a few years to come out, so in parallel you had advanced D&D, which did have paladins, but there were no oaths, and you could only be a lawful good human. And I think, again, it's because Gygax was very human-centric. Human characters were more powerful than anyone else. At very low levels, I'd say 1st through maybe 4th, multi-classes were more powerful. But after that, the single-class characters would become much more powerful, is my experience, quickly. And there were level limits on the different races and such. So you had all these kind of problems. But these were problems in advanced D&D. You really didn't have these problems in basic D&D. Basic D&D had much simpler classes. But again, so advanced D&D abandoned the oaths and just went lawful good. Then in 2E, they still didn't have the oaths, but they made it a little bit easier to work with other people. And they introduced the concept of maybe if you were repentant, you could regain your paladin status. And then it appears that in 5E, they basically softened it so you could pretty much do anything, I would say, and get away with it. And I'm not a fan of 5e. I think they've softened it up way too much. I just look at the pictures from early D&D of like a beholder. Those things are scary, or a dragon. Those things are scary. Now they're making all these cutesy things, and orcs can be good and all this kind of stuff. And to be fair, they could be even in the original editions of D&D. Even in original or advanced and such, they could be, but they were usually portrayed as the scary villains. And you need scary villains because you have to have a foil for the heroes in their adventures to battle. If you're going to have good, you've got to have evil, and vice versa. And I also hear it's almost impossible to die in 5e D&D now. I'm not likely to play that anytime soon. I think they've watered it down too much is the vibe I'm getting. But who knows, if somebody invited me to a 5e campaign, I'd give it a whirl if they were good guys. Lastly, about alignment, I'd like to say one other thing. At the beginning, I said I prefer chaotic neutral characters because I can do just about anything. But alignments are fluid. And so I thought I'd pull up another example that I think would be useful. I pulled out my copy of AD&D Deities and Demigods. And you notice it's in pretty shiny condition. I would say this is in mint condition. You only put the gods and the heroes in here to be antagonists or to help out your campaigns. You don't spend a lot of time in AD&D messing with the gods. But I mentioned at the beginning, one of my favorite characters is Elric. And I guarantee anyone my age who's played D&D or plays D&D has read about the great sorcerer emperor Elric of Malnabani. And Elric is a very interesting character. His arc is the battle between law and chaos. As I said, I think Gygax stole a lot of his law and chaos ideas from the Elric stories. And Elric, if you don't know, he was the weak, sickly albino emperor of basically what I would say were evil elves in another world. And he was the champion of chaos. And if you look here, Elric is chaotic evil. But alignments are funny things, and they're sort of flexible. He was the champion of the Knight of the Sword, Ariok. And he did lots of chaotic and evil things. But by the end of his arc, he was actually the champion of law. Elric was so chaotic that he fought on the side of law. That's about the most chaotic thing I can actually think of. So again, that goes back to why I like chaotic neutral characters. If you're a chaotic neutral, you can absolutely do anything if Elric can be both the champion of chaos and the champion of law. So this was an interesting exercise. Perhaps I'll do more. It was a little long, so it may have been boring in parts, but I had fun doing it. As I said, since I've been retired, I got nothing better to do than go dig through my old books. So it was fun times. Thank you for the comment. Thank you for the video. I actually completely agree with you. Evil characters should be in parties. It makes for a much more interesting dynamic and fun, but it can be a good time. I agree with you that if everyone are just super chaotic and evil, it causes all kinds of problems, and those aren't as fun campaigns. So I get that. I like the freedom to do whatever I want to do. I did play chaotic good characters at the beginning, but then I found I kept getting into I would do some bad things, and I kept having some bad consequences from them. So I just started making chaotic neutral characters after that, and that sort of stuck with me. Unless I had a very special quest or one shot where I wanted to play like a paladin or play a very specific good character. But some of my favorite characters are evil. If I remember right, Lord Robilar was lawful evil or maybe neutral evil. I'll have to go look him up. Gygax famously playtested all of his early modules with Lord Robilar. Robilar successfully soloed the Temple of Elemental Evil. Now, to be fair, I think he was 12th level at the time. So a 12th level fighter is pretty stout. and overpowered for that module, but that was how Gygax liked to play. This was a fun exercise for me, digging through old books and old memories. Perhaps I'll do it again. Thanks. Bye.